This is The Law Show on CL 650. Now back to the show.
Sterling Fox with you on this episode of The Law Show. Joe Murphy, QC, and Angela Price-Stevens with Murphy Battista, personal injury lawyers in Vancouver, back in the studio with us just a few short days ahead of Christmas. We'll talk about some holiday safety suggestions a little later in the program, but right now we're on the matter of chronic pain. And I think one thing that we should probably take a moment and have a little sympathy for some of these people in chronic pain, because I can't imagine if I was involved in some kind of life-changing event that left me for the rest of my earthly days in constant, intense pain, that I would be anything but a really no-fun human being to be around for the rest of my earthly days. I can imagine, Joe, that people who come into Murphy Battista to speak to you and Angela and your colleagues with this issue front and center, in many cases are life's not very much fun, and neither are they anymore.
That's absolutely true, Sterling. And like a person with a brain injury, it's usually a family member or a friend who brings them in.
Right.
Hoping they can get some help. The reality is these people are difficult for the lawyer to deal with. They're difficult for the doctors to deal with. They're difficult for therapists to deal with. And they're really difficult for family and friends to deal with, because they're just so unhappy, so miserable, and so different. And after a while, people, family and friends begin to lose patience with them because they're not getting better. If anything, they get worse over time.
Right. Right. And so how do you counsel family members, Angela, when they get to that tipping point where they, they're still doing the thing, they're doing right by their family member, they're showing up at your office for your meetings as you ask them to, but you can tell they're just at the end of their tether. They've just had the biscuit. How do you counsel people to hang in there?
Well, you treat them with the greatest of respect. If they've hung in that long, it's more than many people do.
Absolutely.
So you treat them with the utmost of respect. You give them empathy. You remind them of what an important role that they are playing in the client's life, how much the client is relying on them, and perhaps also how much I may be relying on them as far as the lawsuit goes. However, it is not my role to be counseling somebody as far as what they ought to be doing. I mean, their life is their life. I'm there to do the very best that I can for the client and to maximize their recovery on the claim. But as I always say, litigation, you can't run your life because of litigation. You have to get on with your life and make the best recovery, make the best you can of your life. Litigation is adjunct, it is attached to that.
Right, right.
So,
Joe, in the case of a lawsuit, and in the litigation scenario, we've talked about this in the context of brain injuries. For example, in a trial situation, you would be very reluctant to put a brain-injured person on the stand to expose that person to cross-examination and possible embarrassment, etc. What about chronic pain? In the case of a lawsuit where the plaintiff is the person in constant, chronic, debilitating pain, would that person be a good witness? You said a lot of them are very unhappy people and most difficult to deal with. In a courtroom scenario, would that be a benefit to you or not?
Well, Sterling, the key is with whether the person's got brain injury or chronic pain syndrome is you almost invariably need to call them as a witness, but you call them after the court or the jury has heard from all the other witnesses or most of the other witnesses.
Okay.
So that they can put in context what this person's doing, what they're saying, how they're coming across. If you start with them first, the impression is very different than if the judge or jury has heard all the story, has heard all the witnesses, especially the lay witnesses, the mother, father, family, friends, coworkers, about how this person has changed. And then it's useful for them to see this new person, the changed person, the after picture.
So the sequencing of the placement in the testimony, right?
It's essential because then they understand why they're presenting the way they do.
Do you from time to time put a person experiencing constant pain in a lawsuit scenario? Do you put those people on the stand?
Invariably, you do.
You have to,
with few, if any, exceptions, because they've got to tell the story from their view, in their eyes, and their perspective will be different than others. But again, when all the other evidence essentially has been heard, then you can understand their evidence. You put it in context. So these people, they don't come across well. They come across well usually when you describe what they were like before this happened.
Right, okay.
But the after person is a shell of the former person, and they're not going to charm anybody.
Right. Angela, you were going to throw something in.
Yes, we don't just put them on the stand to give evidence at the final hearing at the trial, but clients with chronic pain also, again, almost invariably need to go through the process of examination for discovery, which is where they sit down. If they're my client, they'll sit down with me in a relatively informal setting, but they will be asked and made to answer questions under oath, and there will be a transcript.
Okay. And will the opponent's lawyer be with you, be present at that moment?
The opponent's lawyer will be the lawyer asking the questions.
Oh, I see. Okay,
yes,
okay.
That's right.
So they're not responding to your questions; they're responding to the opponent's questions.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
That's right. And so chronic pain or no chronic pain, they are still subject to that process.
Right.
But typically, what will happen is that I will have notified defense counsel that this particular client may only last an hour or 90 minutes at a time, and that I'm just giving them heads up. Don't expect this person to start at 10 in the morning and go through till 4 in the afternoon, because it's just not going to happen.
Sure, sure.
So I try and work cooperatively as I can with defense counsel to remind them that yes, they have a limited period of time to speak to my client under the rules, but they may well have to do this process over several days, over maybe several weeks even.
Okay, Joe, when you're suing, when you have that client, that chronic pain client in court, and you're suing, is the outcome, the desirable outcome from your perspective at least, seeing damages awarded to your client that would represent enough funds to at least have some kind of quality of life for the rest of their life?
Well, yes, so that's all we can do in a lawsuit is we recover damages. We don't recover health, we don't recover their life, we just recover damages. The problem in a chronic pain case, Sterling, is that when someone is still within their working life before the age of 60, how is the court or how is the jury going to assess what their future earning loss is? Are they going to go back to work? Are they going to go back to work at all or part-time? Are they going to go back to work at a job that pays less? Those are difficult questions. And again, with the inability to access most pain clinics, the defense in these cases will inevitably say, well, all they need is a pain clinic, and then they're going to be cured, and everything will be fine within 2 years. So, yes, you recover damages, but there's the risk that the damages aren't enough to cover the losses, the future income loss, the future care costs.
If the court bought the defense argument that, a good round of pain clinics in a couple of years and this guy will be back on his feet, no problem at all, and they award you damages to basically cover off 2 years, what happens at the end of that term when the individual is no better, not one whit better than they were the moment they were awarded the damages?
Well,
can you go back?
What happens, you can't go back. What happens is the money runs out. The money's gone.
And that's that?
Yeah. You can't go back and say to the judge, it didn't work out that well. Going to court is a one and only opportunity. And the key is making sure the award's adequate. The insurance company who's defending the case is, of course, pushing for a much lower
minimal
award.
Amount. Sure, of course.
And the judge or jury hearing the case is thinking to themselves, we've got to be careful that the award is not too much or too little.
Right.
And for a judge dealing with a chronic pain case, they're just so difficult, or a jury dealing with them. What does the crystal ball say about the future? Are they going to get better and able to go back to work? Are they going to get better and need no meds or less meds,
right.
no counseling, less counseling? they're difficult cases.
Angela, based on your experience, what is the likelihood of a person involved in a serious lawsuit over chronic pain? What is the likelihood of that individual returning to the workforce and assuming the role they had before the accident?
Oh, well, the last few words made that question very simple. If they're suffering with chronic pain, it's highly unlikely that they would be able to go back and resume their former job.
Right.
Now, of course, it depends on the circumstances before you could say that definitively, but it's as definitively as I can get. I mean, by the nature of chronic pain, it is debilitating. So the real question, as Joe has alluded to, is not can they go back to their former job? Is this person ever going to be able to work
I was just going
again?
to say,
And
support themselves in
if
any
so,
way. Yeah.
Yeah, and if so, to what extent? And often defense will, they'll start off by saying, well, this person's going to get better. Give them 2 years and they'll be back to what they're doing. And then
Right.
the back step from that is, well, they have some capacity to work, and that's a more difficult statement to address, because it may well be that they have some capacity, but the real question then is you look at the reality. I've had reports from defense counsel where their expert has said, oh, this person can work. I mean, she just has to find a job where she doesn't do this, this, and this. She only works a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday.
Right.
Means that way she's got Tuesday and Thursday to recover.
Oh, there's so many of those jobs available,
And
huh?
her teenage children at home, well, they can be doing all the housework. So what is she complaining about? So there's this reality gap between saying or proposing that somebody can go back to work, but the reality is, no, there's no job that will allow that amount of flexibility.
If there isn't, if you can't go back, if it is a one-shot deal, as I'm learning it is there appeal? If you're dissatisfied with the judgment that you've won on behalf of your client, you don't think it's going to be enough to last that person for the rest of her life, can you appeal the judgment?
You can appeal it, Sterling, but the way in which the appeal court operates is they look for big, obvious errors. They're not there to retry the case.
Okay.
The judge heard the case,
Sure.
the jury heard the case. So they look for what's called palpable and overriding errors. And if they find them, the Court of Appeal can interfere with the award. They can send the case back to trial. But if they find that those errors aren't there, then they're not going to change it. So you don't really get a second kick at the cat at the appeal court, because the evidence is the same. There's transcript of the evidence from trial.
So all the more reason for anyone listening to the program right now, experiencing or knowing or living or being related to someone experiencing chronic pain, the advice from our friend Angela here, of course, is go see a lawyer if you haven't already. You should by now. And the more experienced the lawyer, the more likely you are going to be to get some measure of satisfaction from an incident that has changed your life for good. MurphyBatista.com, a great place to start when looking for those lawyers. Murphy Batista LLP, personal injury lawyers. Our guests from the firm, Joe Murphy and Angela Price Stevens, back with some, well, holiday advice after this.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.